We'll get started, and it looks like some people will still be joining. So welcome to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Committee meeting. Today we have just kind of a reminder, as was the last few meetings, just kind of general guidelines to mute ourselves. It doesn't look like we have a huge group today, so it might be less of an issue, but we'll go ahead and mute ourselves when we're not speaking. And if anyone is unmuted, sometimes just the background noise can be distracting, or it'll shift the camera to that person. So I'll just politely remind you to mute yourself if you're unmuted. Don't take it personally. So that's just a reminder there. And then kind of an overview of what we'll be covering in today's meeting. We'll be talking about just what happened at the last council meeting, the two actions that the council took regarding climate and our recommendations of the committee. And then we'll talk about kind of what we'll be working on the remainder of our term as a committee over the next few months. And then kind of looking at the bigger picture, the urgency of the climate crisis, and kind of looking, taking a step back and trying to figure out what we can do to raise awareness within our community around the climate crisis. And then leaving time, towards the end, if there's any other input, general input, questions, comments folks want to make. So we'll just kind of start, I guess. Phil, any comments right off the bat before we get started?
No, nothing right off the bat. No.
Okay.
I might have something at the end after I listen to everything.
Okay. Phil, yeah, I was going to ask you to recap, since you were at the council meeting, I guess it was last week, about what the council did last week.
Oh, I'm happy to do that. I'm going to suggest, however, that you take the next item before that, because it kind of leads into what we presented at the council meeting last Tuesday.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So what I was going to do is just briefly provide kind of the context for those not familiar, or just kind of worth repeating, the purpose of the Climate Committee. So it was almost 2 years ago, it was July of 2019, that the council passed a climate emergency declaration. And at the time decided to form a climate committee, and the 5 of us were appointed. And the focus of our committee is to present high impact ways that the city can reduce emissions. So we're focusing on climate mitigation. And climate mitigation is really, how do we stop making our climate change problem from getting worse? How do we get at the root cause, which is burning of fossil fuels? And there's some question about that versus climate adaptation. And a lot of focus right now, especially in Ojai, is around fire preparedness, rightfully so, and around our water issues. So those we see as kind of a consequence, a symptom. These are the consequences of climate change. We're having more frequent fires, more severe fires. These are being fueled by climate change. Same thing with our water. We're having increased water shortages, droughts, longer droughts, as a consequence of our burning of fossil fuels. So there are, thankfully, we have very competent, knowledgeable individuals in the Valley, and groups, organizations working on those two issues of water and fire, and other issues related to climate adaptation and resiliency. The focus of our group is really focusing at how do we reduce emissions and sequester carbon, to hopefully have, to help with the fire problem, to help with the water problem longer term. So I just wanted to clarify the scope and purpose of our committee. I just think it's worth repeating, because, we're not kind of any and all things environmental. We're really trying to stay laser focused on what the city can do, and what's in the, purview of the city. What can it do to reduce emissions and set an example for other jurisdictions? So we're a small town, but we do have influence outside of our boundaries, and we recognize that role we play. So in the last 2 years, since the council passed that climate emergency declaration, there's been some great steps forward. There was a formation of the committee. REACH code was passed, which requires new buildings to be all electric. And there's been some other great progress made. And so now we're going to be talking about what additional work's ahead of us as well. So I just wanted to provide that context. Thanks, Phil. So you can go ahead and then share what progress was made last week.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle. And I want to add to what you said about our marching orders, I guess you could call it. In December of 2019 was the council meeting where we were formally appointed individually as members of the committee. And in the letter to council are included our focus areas. The committee will focus on solutions for the following areas: energy, investigate options to support energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electrification. Vehicles and other internal combustion engines, investigate options to support low or no emission alternatives to internal combustion vehicles and or other engines. 3, carbon sequestration, investigate options for removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And 4, city operations, investigate options to incorporate climate emergency throughout city operations. And to take that into what we presented last Tuesday at the council, there were two actions that we asked the council to make. The first related to the postal vehicles, understanding that the postal service have decided to replace the vehicles, maybe nationwide, I guess nationwide, and that some of them are to be electric vehicles. And we presented a motion to the council, recommendation to adopt a motion that that they send a letter to the Postal Service as well as to our elected officials on the federal level, requesting that Ojai be provided with electric vehicles for post office vehicles in Ojai. And that passed unanimously. It's maybe a symbolic gesture, but a lot of what we're doing is symbolic and exemplary, showing other jurisdictions what can be done. Ojai has been a leader in that. The second item we brought to the council had to do with electrification of city facilities and the city vehicle fleet. And this mirrored what was presented to the County Board of Supervisors about a year and a half ago, I think, year and a half to 2 years ago, by Supervisor Bennett to propose that the board adopt policy direction to the county staff to electrify the county's vehicle fleet, particularly at the time of vehicle replacement, and to discourage buying new gasoline, diesel powered vehicles. So based on the language that Supervisor Bennett used, we composed a letter to the city council recommending that they do the same thing in the city of Ojai, as well as make a policy, provide policy direction to staff to electrify city facilities. In other words, replace equipment that burns natural gas with electric equipment, particularly at the time of equipment replacement. And this motion was made and passed again unanimously by the council. So the council has provided policy direction to staff to electrify the city's facilities, both buildings and vehicles. It should be pointed out that we had recommended that they set a goal to do so by 2025. That was modified by the council, something to the effect that when they're able to financially. And we do understand that the council does have budgetary limits, but we're very pleased to see the council again taking action on climate. So that's kind of my report for what happened on Tuesday.
Great, thanks, Bill. Are there any questions or comments about that? Ray?
Yeah, I'd like to add
Oh,
a
Bill.
couple things. One is consent item K, in last council's meeting, included a resolution supporting a request for a grant for federal funding with a 20% city match for electric powered trolley and related electric charging infrastructure and supporting staff. So we authorized applying for that grant. We also, in the meeting before that, upped the enforcement efforts and basically reconfigured and stepped up the enforcement on a couple of things, most especially the internal combustion yard equipment prohibition. So we did those two things over the last two meetings as well.
That was great. Yeah, that's fabulous. Thanks for the reminder.
Ray, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and thanks, Bill. You addressed a couple of those things. I was going to ask about the trolley. And I know a couple of years ago, I did some research on electric trolley, and they were about 450,000 each or something like that. So I was going to ask if that was in the plan. That's expensive, you know, and if there are grants available. So Bill, you answered that. And I was curious about the garden equipment, because I'm still noticing a lot of two-stroke engines in the gardeners around my neighborhood that are being used. And I don't really want to go around and police people and take photographs.
Just text somebody at City Hall, you know, either James or somebody else. That's all you need to do. Or send an email to Mr. Estrada.
Well,
There's
part
a
of the
Jack?
con-
Oh, hang on a second. Looks like Jack
Hi.
wants to contribute. Jack, we
Oh,
can't see you, so I guess if you can raise.
Oh yeah, my video, it's just, that's on purpose right now. So,
Okay,
sorry.
okay. That's
It's
okay. Or
been-
you could raise hand. I mean, I just didn't know that you were wanting to speak. So yeah, you can, Ray, were you finished or Jack?
I wasn't. My concern, Bill, on the garden equipment is I know there's, you know, a lot of these people, just by looking at them, they don't have big companies, and for them to get rid of their two strokes and get electric equipment, my gut feeling is they don't have the finances to do that. And is staff or are there subsidies available for that? Is anything available for those folks? Because it's kind of, you know, I'm concerned about impinging on people's livelihood when they don't have a way to get the equipment that the city is allowing.
The quick answer is we had a long phase-in period, but we don't have any subsidy program. No.
All right, Jack, did you want to make a comment or ask a question? Jack, you're muted. I don't know if you want to or not.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I have a phone number, a hotline to report two-stroke motor usage. There's a hotline number. I haven't actually used it, but I have one. Are you aware of that, Bill?
Yes, there's a hotline number as well as texting and emailing. Yeah, Ray, you can use the hotline, and you know it works really. We're actually also looking at upgrading. You know, there's been some controversy over whether we adopt an application that people can. Let's say they see what you're seeing, Ray. We could actually take a picture and automatically it generates a report with a GIS and a timestamp to the city enforcement officer. Some people have concerns about the invasion of privacy that would have, but we're looking into that as well.
It might be a good idea. It might be a good idea to put that hotline number on that part of the website where our committee information is, in addition to wherever it now is located.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And thank you, Jack, for reminding me about that. That's a good idea.
I'm more concerned, not more concerned, I'm also concerned just about the social justice issue, and that, you know, some folks can't afford to purchase this, and how do we navigate that? You know, it's easy to pass an ordinance and say, here's the direction we want our city to go and reduce emissions. It's another to take a humanistic approach and go, not everyone has the finances to do that. What creative thinking can we apply to making sure these people get the equipment? You know, is that sponsorships from the companies that make these things, or you know, how can we apply our imaginations to really be inclusive with that ban?
You know, I appreciate, Ray, the concern. However, at least my own personal view is that as soon as you start collapsing multiple domains and multiple dimensions and multiple concerns, pretty soon you get a sufficiently uh, uh, large conversation that it typically negates the value of the thing. I think we need to keep the climate action that's appropriate separate, and then have the social equity conversation or the economic support conversation, which is worthy of a conversation, but don't try to piggyback the social justice issue on top of climate policy. I think at that point you end up pretty much negating everything, or everything becomes an exception.
Don't you think they're parallel conversations, though?
I think they're parallel but separate, yes.
Okay, I see Jack, your hand's up, and let's just take kind of one more comment on this topic because it wasn't kind of part of the agenda per se, but I'm happy to have some conversation around. I just want to make sure we kind of cover other things too. So Jack, do you have another comment? You're muted right now.
Sorry. Yeah, it came up in our group that wasn't there going to be a lending library sort of thing, like a lending policy like through the city. I know that they have that up in Berkeley, and I thought that it was being implemented or looked into here. So I just wanted to remind about that.
Okay. Bill, I don't know if you have one final comment to that.
Yeah, Jack, that was discussed but never implemented. And frankly, with the advent of the pandemic, you know, the financial stress became pretty acute. We had the largest percentage decline in revenue of any city in Ventura County because of the pandemic. So okay. You know, it's not an excuse for not being sensitive to these issues, but frankly, the focus became on financial survival. And, you know, I don't mean that as an excuse or be flippant about it, but I think it did get in the way of that discussion, Jack. You know.
And that's where I think community organizing could fill in that gap potentially, you know, neighbors among neighbors sharing. That's, you know, I think maybe people within the community could help getting creative about how we can go about sharing our resources and, you know, equipment. I'd be happy to lend my electric lawnmower out and, you know what I mean? So I have it sitting there idle. So we don't even use it because we don't have a functioning lawn. Anyway, so, okay. Anything else, Steve? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to the electrification of the postal vehicles, because it actually is a little bit more than symbolic. The entire postal fleet that we have is 25 to 30 years old, and talking to the local postmaster, it's being held together with bubble gum and duct tape, and the entire fleet is due for replacement. And it just so happens that the U.S. Post Office is in the process of letting a multi-billion-dollar contract to update the postal fleet through the whole U.S. And we will be one of the first to receive that updated fleet. Now, there is a congressional controversy because our postmaster, Louis DeJoy, handed the contract to a company that promised that only 10% of its vehicles would be electrified. The remainder are gasoline powered, which is contrary to our president's promise to electrify the vehicle fleet. So our request to our congressional delegation, which is a real request and will have merit, is that if it turns out that the initial allocation of vehicles is through Oshkosh, which is the 10% electric, that we, because of the nature of our valley and our commitment to climate, be among those who receive the electric vehicle fleet. So this will happen within the next couple of years. And if we can get one of our senators or congressperson to come in support of that, we have a good chance of actually getting a modernized electric, non-polluting vehicle fleet. So not only is it a climate advantage, but that's one of the major movements, vehicle miles traveled throughout our valley that we can affect.
And from an air quality perspective too, right? I mean, being the second worst air quality in Ventura County, Ojai Valley. So I guess anything that we can do to reduce our, pollutants from an air quality perspective too. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, Steve, that opportunity. Steve or Phil, do you guys want to, one of you take a stab at talking about what we're going to be focusing on the next few months, because you're involved and have, been doing some work on the GHG, et cetera. So do you guys want to do that?
Steve, you want to take it?
I was going to ask you if you wanted to take it, but that's fine. I'll quickly update us on where we are with the greenhouse gas inventory, and please fill in, Phil. So we are working very closely with the Air Pollution Control District, and we were essentially asked to focus first on the a greenhouse gas inventory before this committee did other things. But essentially, a development of a greenhouse gas inventory is an engineering and a scientific endeavor. There are rules of accounting that we have to follow to do that. And by background, it's Phil and I who have the background to work closely with our Air Pollution Control District to complete this task. So it's currently underway. We're working with the head of engineering, who's beginning to put together a spreadsheet of all of the sources of greenhouse gases. And it's really important that we recognize that, I mean, we're really looking at methane and carbon dioxide, and not the whole panoply of other emissions that are part of an area airshed analysis. It's just the greenhouse gases, and we're looking at the major sources of that, which are principally for us combustion of fossil fuels, whether that's in vehicles or in our case, the use of natural gas for water and space heating. And so that is being compiled. It's also being reviewed by the California Air Resources Board. So we'll have the best eyes on that. But it's real. The accounting procedures are well established. So for instance, in thinking about vehicle miles traveled and mobile emissions, the inventory assigned to the city of Ojai will be for the vehicles that are registered in Ojai. The presumption would be the tourism is not going to be separately accounted for, except as area sources for things like the inn, because it would be if travelers from LA weren't coming to Ojai, they might be coming to Montecito or Santa Barbara or points north. So that kind of travel is going to occur anyway. So anyway, the process is underway. It's detailed. There's a lot of addition of various sources that are involved in it.
Steve, Bill, I have a question. Yeah. We heard or read, or I can't remember what the original report was, that Ventura County is the fastest warming county in the country. Is that correct?
You know, so it's slightly faster warming than other counties. I wouldn't put a lot of weight into that. I mean, we are warming as a globe. The effects in different parts of the globe are going to be not consistent. But you know, we have been #1 for a while in California. Yes.
But does that, I mean, it seems logical, but does that extrapolate that Ojai is one of the fastest warming communities?
Well, I mean, I think for any of us who have lived here any length of time, by perception, we can feel that. But again, that's you know, over a short period of time. I don't think that is necessarily a consistent pattern. But the issue is that this is a global problem. It's real, and we have to be operating on it as though it is clearly an emergency, and the responses must be dramatic.
No, that's great. Well, I want to get on that in a little while, and it's another topic. But go ahead and let's finish this one.
Phil?
You're muted, Phil. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, good report, Steve. And I would just add something I said when we previously talked about it, that while it is interesting to know the breakdown of the various sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Ojai, and we should do it and continue with it. We do know that in order to solve this climate crisis, that we need to reduce these emissions from buildings that are burning natural gas. We need to reduce emissions from vehicles that are burning gasoline and diesel. We need to generate the electricity that we use using renewable sources. So irrespective of the what we see in the greenhouse gas emission inventory, we know that we really need to act on reducing emissions from buildings and from vehicles and from power plants.
Thanks, Phil. Phil or Steve, what about in terms of the general plan update and kind of conversion of our suggestions into policies? Do either one of you want to?
We've got 2.5 months left. What else? What
Right.
else is on our plate?
You want me to take it, Steve? Okay. We, the Climate Committee, presented to the council a report last June, I believe it was, with a comprehensive list of recommendations for actions that should be taken by the city to mitigate the climate crisis. And that report was prepared as a report of recommendations. We understand that the city's preparing a new general plan update. And our intent is to take the recommendations that were included in that report last summer and convert the language of those recommendations into policy and program statements. And it's not complicated to do that. Policies and general plans have language, for example, the city shall incorporate blah, blah, blah. The word shall is the operative word on a policy or a program statement. So we will be taking the report that we did last summer and tweaking the words to change our recommendations from recommendations into policy statements and pass those on to the city council and planning commission and the consultant who's pulling together the general plan for possible incorporation into the general plan.
Any questions or comments about that?
If we're aligned on that, I have one other thing I wanted to open up as a final in terms of our end, assuming that we expire in the beginning of July.
Right. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I don't, it's sort of this irony. When I'm working in a corporation, particularly these days, one of the major ideas that's fundamental in my view is that unless every individual is responsible for the whole, then the whole thing is not going to work. That you can't get the kind of change you need in organizations by trying to modify a lot of individual behaviors. People pretty much just modify their own behavior if it's going to change at all. And they don't typically change their behavior unless they really have a sense of responsibility for the whole. And so I was thinking about that in the context of this community. And while I was talking to Councilman Haney the other day, and we were talking about the city boundaries are only 3 square miles or so. But by the same token, our relationship with the larger communities around us and ultimately the globe is sort of analogous to the relationship between an individual and an organization and his or her capability of being responsible for the whole organization. So in that sense, I think one of the ideas that has sort of been present but not explicit in a lot of our conversations about climate has been in Ojai or near Ojai, but really has not tried to open up community awareness in terms of ownership for the larger issue. I don't know how many of you have read the book by Bill Gates that was published recently called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. Well, I mean, if you haven't read it, I recommend it. Now, whether you like Gates or not is not the issue. The issue is here's a guy who's got the resources and who's really taking a stand for this issue. And I don't want to go into the book at length, but one of the biggest ideas in this book, which really was a kind of eye opener for me, was the idea that we're polluting globally about 51,000 billion tons of CO2 per year. And that if we're going to avoid a disaster, and we're talking an existential disaster here, and I'm not doing Chicken Little here. I'm just saying if we're going to avoid whatever your worst case scenario is, we need to get to zero. Now, this is the first major leader in the world I know who's saying progress is not going to cut it. And working in a continuously improvement mindset is not going to be sufficient to make a hell of a difference in terms of the ultimate outcome of this. The only strategy that's ultimately going to work is to get to zero. Now, this is analogous to what we do in corporations when we say in a manufacturing context, we need to get to zero defects. Or in IBM, when we talk about we need to learn to write software with zero bugs. Now, when you make an absolute commitment and you draw a line in the sand at zero, the first thing that you think is, well, that's impossible, and that's unreasonable, and that it's crazy that you're asking for perfection. It never is going to happen. But after people grind on that for a while, they come to the realization that when you commit to zero, you may or may not get there. But the issue isn't whether you get there ultimately or not, or whether you're exactly on target. It's what does it do to you today if you can make a commitment to absolute zero? It changes your mindset, it changes your strategy, it changes your thinking. You don't rationalize that getting better is enough. Getting better is not enough in this particular issue, at least according to Gates. So it opened up for me a thought line, which is, can we, the committee, create some kind of a communication as our final contribution to the community to try to open up a broader sense of awareness of how it may not be destroying our immediate environment here in the community, but if you stand back a little bit, our neighbors not too many thousands of miles away, could very well be going under. I just read another book called The Ministry for the Future, which is a sort of a fiction book, but it really begins to illuminate and bring to mind at a kind of emotional level how profoundly important this issue is. I think you may have heard that Scientific American, in an open letter signed by 13,000 climate scientists, have said, let's stop talking about climate crisis. Let's stop talking about, climate change. Let's call it what it is, which is a climate emergency. So just in the process of shifting the language from it's an issue we need to work on to it's an emergency and we need to get to zero, or whatever your version of that may be, I find at least to be a kind of wake-up call, in the same sense that I, as an individual, have to have some sense of responsibility for the less advantaged people in my community. We, as a privileged community, have an opportunity to have a much broader impact. So I wouldn't have used the word symbolic, but at least my view is, and my strong view is, that what Ojai has more than many places is we have a voice, and that the voice of our city council and the voice of this committee, has a much bigger impact than necessarily just our immediate environment. And that as a consequence, everything we've been doing to encourage the city council to express their commitment, and the original resolution which declared this to be an emergency, is really an opportunity. It's a leadership issue. It's not a technical solution issue. It's an issue of really not only taking a stand, but being able to give our voice to the world or to the larger environment, to say, look, this is not a matter of whether you believe it or not. This is a matter of understanding it. And if you're understanding it, the preponderance of science here is saying it's urgent, it's immediate, and we're talking, 10 to 15 years, serious issues. And if in the Paris Accord, at the rate we're going, doesn't look like we're going to make it. So it's looking bleaker than brighter in terms of what some of the science is saying about this. So my suggestion to this committee, and we don't have to resolve it today, is to see if we might draft some kind of a communication, a sort of open letter to our community or to the council, and to say, this is what the committee has to say about who we are as individuals, who we are as a community, and our responsibility and the opportunity we have to be leaders and to take a stand for leadership in the larger context of this emergency. So that's my thinking.
Thank you. See, Jack, your hand's up, and I know, Jack, you've been studying this for a long time. You've written a book about climate change and the climate emergency. So what would you like to say?
And then Bill had his hand up too.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's your name, the fellow who was just speaking?
Jim Selman.
Hi, Jim. Yeah. So anyway, 2 years ago, that's how we began with the climate emergency being declared here in Ojai, is that a bunch of us went to city council. Michelle was there and other people were there. And we spent about 2.5 months, pleading with city council to declare climate emergency. And lots of facts were mentioned there. And so, we've been under the assumption that we're in a climate emergency, but the actions have not reflected that. So the declaration was signed, the ordinance was made, but we haven't acted with any emergency speed, and that's been disheartening to me. And one of the ideas that I've been promoting, and that I think has been bandied around a bit in some of these meetings, and maybe even a couple meetings ago, was the community outreach piece that you were just discussing. And just the having community education is so important, to have classes, to have something that's announced, right? So that we go out of our way, and so that the media in Ojai can go out of their way a bit, and we start announcing this stuff so that people learn about what's going on. And I'm curious, what is Gates's bottom line? Like, what is he saying that we need to do? You mentioned go to zero, but go to zero what? Net, gross? What does
Net.
Go to zero mean?
Net carbon.
And when?
2050.
Okay. All right. So, he's online with what the IPCC is saying and everybody else, but that it's happening more quickly than that. And I think you alluded to that when you were speaking, right?
Well, I don't know exactly what I was alluding to at the time you're referring, but I think that's the intent behind what he's saying.
Okay. Well, the IPCC.
There's also a YouTube interview with Greta Thunberg and Financial Times, which, if you haven't seen it, is extraordinary in terms of her take on this. And she's matured a lot in the last few years. She's not not the angry teenager she was so much, but a very
Yeah.
thoughtful, realistic leader in that context.
Yeah, I think we've all been listening to Greta for a while. But anyway, and so the other point is that and I'm sorry we don't have to go into this right now because I was a little bit late to the meeting, but the climate emergency committee here is just going to be disbanded in July, so that's it.
Well, we don't know, but our current term expires at the end of June.
Okay, well that would be really tragic because I feel like we've barely gotten going on anything.
Good.
So,
Bill, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there's an extent to which what you're talking about is already happening, but it doesn't happen with a lot of, media play in terms of each one of us on council is on these county organizations. And we're pretty strong in collectively raising our voices on these issues at the county level, where I got to tell you, there's not a whole lot of sustainability sensitivity in action from representatives of a lot of these other cities. And we've been a real voice of that. And I'll give you one very poignant example right now. And that is that in terms of the handling of solid waste in this county, we have actions by the city of Thousand Oaks. We have actions by 2 private vendors, Waste Management and Athens, that are dramatically attempting to force or influence the city of Oxnard to join with the city of Thousand Oaks in dramatically increasing vehicle miles traveled for solid waste disposal, dramatically increasing emissions in the process of getting that done. You see the private corporate interests not being handled well at the county level. And I've been a big voice on the Ventura Regional Sanitation District about this problem. We're right in the middle of it. The city of Oxnard they start talking about, and I had an interesting conversation with James Vega about this, where he said, we just take it for granted that, when those of us on the Ojai City Council, we just reflect the community sensibilities, that we're always thinking about the public benefit, sustainability. What's the best way to do this? Not the cheapest. And yet we have other cities in this county that, whatever the cheapest is, no matter what the environmental consequences are, the negative externalities, that's the way to go. And so I just want to say that I think a part of it is that us as a community showing solidarity in terms of how we represent ourselves on these county level agencies is something that we're all taking very seriously. This kind of committee helps us be more effective with that. But that it's, between the global impact and the city impact, there's the county impact where we have real impact. People forget that we were one of the first to appeal a county planning decision with respect to the Bentley oil field. And we called into question all kinds of assumptions about, Phil's very aware of this, some of the practices that were going on, we exposed. And we feel that while we lost that appeal 3-2, we sufficiently highlighted problems with respect to sustainability and climate neutrality and climate management practices that led to changes in the Ventura County plan ultimately. That led to, and I think I just wanted to highlight the fact that let's not forget about in between the city and the global issues. Let's look at where we have the leverage at the county level.
That's fabulous, Bill. In fact, thank you for saying that. I guess I would change my question a little bit to say, how could the committee in our final communication, or if this is a final communication, if we're not renewed, support the leadership agenda, not specific policies related to climate necessarily, but yes, climate as well. But with climate in the background, is there something that we could do as a committee to empower, enhance, validate the leadership of the council, or to enhance council's voice in the world?
All these all these agencies that we are part of, because by virtue of being a city in Ventura County, and kind of help us come up with ways that we can exercise our influence. Maybe there's some things we haven't thought of about, for example, I'm on the commission for VCTC right now. What are some things maybe we haven't thought of that we could push with VCTC? You know, you have Ryan showing that leadership on the Air Pollution Quality Control Board. There's SCAG, there's Southern California Association of Governments. Make sure we haven't, you know, help us think of all the ways that we could push the sustainability agenda at these at the county levels that we are part of.
Well, that's the general area that I'm proposing we want to open up to for a future meeting, guys.
I just wanted to make a couple comments along.
No, that's great, Bill. Thanks. Phil?
You're muted, Phil. There.
Oh, Michelle, I'm not. I got an email today from Al Gore, because I'm associated with his climate reality group and have gone through the training. And if you haven't done that, all of you people here, I know that some of us have. I strongly recommend it. It's really good training and education about climate. And I want to just read one sentence that Al Gore sent to me and tens of thousands of other people, not just me. He says, "We must keep up the pressure and insist that our leaders aggressively fight the climate crisis now, while we still have the chance to turn things around." And you know, I would second what Jim has to say about you know, a message to get out to our community, and what Jack also said, that we can do that, and that should be something that we try to do as long as we exist as a committee. Whether that runs out in July or whether we get extended another year or whatever, to make that statement.
Well, you know, one of the examples that Greta gave, which is if you think about what happened with the pandemic, like literally in a matter of weeks or months, you know, the whole world pivoted, and that's a global response to in this case, the COVID. But if you compare that kind of mobilization to the kind of mobilization that's occurring around climate, it's not even close. So it's growing and it's expanding, but it's not the kind of response that happens when you have an emergency. It's making progress. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, I too have read Bill Gates' book, and it's, you know, the title is very appropriate, How to Avoid a Climate Catastrophe. And for us to get from here to there is going to be nothing short of a revolutionary change in the way in which we operate. It's going to be a complete paradigm shift of a scale that we've seen before. I mean, the pandemic is a good example of how quickly we can shift globally in response to a signal. But, you know, essentially he is saying that by 2050, we pretty much have to be weaned of fossil fuels. That's coal, oil, as well as natural gas. And so if we are to think about how to get there, one of the things that I hadn't thought a lot about before reading his book, but which was enlightening to me, is that we can do a lot of wrong things through incremental changes. So in other words, if we try to make progress toward 2030, we might be doing things that really undercut our ability to be at net zero by 2050. And his clear example of that is what happens if we start to burn natural gas and build new natural gas peaking plants today that are not going to be fully amortized by 2050, and say that that's better than burning oil or coal. But in fact, it's going to prevent us from making our necessary goal for 2050. So if we think about this from the perspective of Ojai, and let's say we are at net zero by 2050, it's really going to mean that we don't have any gasoline powered vehicles in Ojai. It's going to mean that we've cut off our natural gas line into the city and that we're fully electrified. It truly is a revolutionary shift that's going to be necessary for us to get from here to there, and incrementalism is simply not going to cut it.
And it's not merely that, it's not merely a change in what we do, it's a change in who we are and our relationship to the whole. And that's the big mobilization challenge.
I was going to say one thing. I'd watched that Greta interview that you shared with our committee, Jim. And one of the things, again, that I was reminded of like, you know, it's one thing to have these pledges, you know, 2050, you know, 2050 is decades away, you know, even 2030, these timeline horizons aren't kind of real. They kind of put off taking action right now. It's like, so what is she uses the term, you know, the carbon budget for this year. So every year, you know, what's our carbon budget as a community? What is the amount of carbon, you know, we can allow ourselves to emit, and, you know, each year decrease that amount. So it's like, we have to be doing things right now, this year, yesterday, you know, we can't wait till 2030. I think that's the problem we're going to run into if we have these longer term timeframes, deadlines. I think it's good to have a goal, but then you got to back up from there, you know, year by year. What are you doing? What are we doing this year? What are we doing in 2021 as a community to curb our emissions? What are we going to do next year? So I think that's an important part of the conversation as well. Jack, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I imagine everyone on this call knows that we're in an emergency and that incremental changes aren't going to work. So I just haven't heard a lot of fresh new ideas in the last 15 minutes. But I just have a really practical question. And this is to the committee, and maybe someone from the committee can answer. Do you all want to continue to be a committee beyond July?
So the response I'll respond, and then anyone else can fill in. So the reason we're going through July is we're considered an ad hoc committee. So basically the council has approved us as ad hoc. That's kind of the composition, the type of committee that we are. And so we can be kind of work at 6-month stints. For longer term established committees, more permanent committees, those are called, you know, commissions or standing committees. Those are Brown Act committees. So there's different rules and regulations about those types of committees. And so we are formed as an ad hoc committee. So that's why we kind of are working at 6-month increments. So the council, when they formed, this is our third kind of iteration as a committee. So that's why we go through July. It was renewed in January. There was concern at the time that it's going to, you know, become more complicated if the council continues to renew us as an ad hoc committee. You know, 6 months again, 6 months again. Then it kind of starts to look more like a permanent commission type structure. So that's why it is the way it is.
Okay.
Any other comments? Bill?
Just
If I could jump in here, I would say, Jack, to answer your question, I think that I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for the other four, that I'm still going to be interested in climate action in my community and in my county and in the planet. So if the council wants to continue with a climate committee, and I think there are good arguments to be made for doing that, I'm certainly willing to continue. And so, yes, I think there is an interest in continuing.
okay. And if I can just add, I would like to do whatever I can, and with the connections that I have, if there's letters that we can write to city council, I just want to know what the game plan is, because it's crucial that we have a climate movement. We're talking about all these monumental changes that we need to affect, but we may not even have a climate emergency committee after July. And to me, that's untenable. So I guess I'll just wait to hear if there's something that any of us can do, and I'm willing to speak to my contacts here, my groups, to support whatever the committee wants to do. That's why I asked if y'all want to continue to be a committee. And if it's not going to be an official ad hoc committee through the council, then I would love to participate in meeting with you all to continue the effort in whatever capacity we can.
Perfect. That's great, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And I would say, and I've said this, I know you and I have had conversations about this before, that, the climate committee, we're just 5 individuals in the community that were appointed by council, but we have a much larger community involved and caring about climate. And before I was on the committee, I was an activist and showing up at city council, and we were still getting things done. So it's not, the climate committee isn't the be all end all of climate action. We're kind of one voice, but as part of a larger collective voice. So if the committee weren't to continue, I'd still be advocating as I always have been. So looking forward to partnering with you. Okay. Anything else? Oh, Bill.
Bill?
The city attorney continues to provide his opinion that the longer this committee exists, the more the pressure, in his opinion, will be on going to a Brown Act committee. Just want to point that out. He keeps reminding us about that.
I will comment on that because as a member of 2 separate Brown Act committees, what I'm used to is that as a Brown Act committee member, and in one case, I am a hearing board officer for Santa Barbara County's Air Pollution Control District, and I also serve on the advisory committee to the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District. In both of those cases, the yeoman's effort is conducted by staff. And in fact, at the hearing board, the staff produces papers about this thick that when we do have a hearing, we review. And my role as a Brown Act committee member is as a talking head. And what I find difficult here is that if we're going to actually implement things in the city of Ojai, we are also being restricted not to utilize any staff resources. And we've been very careful as part of this committee to not do that. But I'm personally probably not going to continue on this committee if in fact it turns into a Brown Act committee that is not able to utilize resources of the staff to implement some of these policies that we're talking about. It's a catch-22 and an unfortunate position to be in.
Well, we've got 2.5 months to continue the dialogue, and I guess we're just about out of time, Michelle.
Right. So we're about 5 o'clock now. We didn't have a specific end time. I know we were going to make sure we wrapped up no later than 5:30 because the Planning Commission has a meeting immediately following us. But we can still allow for a little bit more time if there's any other comments or thoughts related to that kind of bigger picture conversation, the climate emergency. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Jack?
Ray,
Ray. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you. Sorry, Jack, I already called. You can go ahead, but then I'll get
Go
you.
ahead, Jack.
I just have something very short. I just want to thank each of you on the committee for all your work. That's all. I really appreciate it. And I feel distressed to hear that we might not have this committee after July. I feel distressed about that. And anyway, that's all I want to say. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll ditto that too. I was really thrilled when this committee got formed. I'm not distressed if it goes away. I know the work that Bill and others have been doing in the background. I do think it's important the community knows more about that. PR is always, to me, PR has always been kind of a problem or a overlooked aspect of city council. I'm not sure how to remedy that. I know staff is stretched, but I think if the community did know more of what was happening incrementally, there might be more community support. We've seen how the community shows up when there's an article in the newspaper, for instance. I, like Jack, I want to make myself available to drill deeper with the city and with you guys on whatever's needed. I think what I bring to the table is more of a systems thinking approach. In the last couple of meetings, I know I've brought up things and it's like, well, that's not our purview, or that's a parallel conversation. I don't think like that. Everything's connected, just like in nature. Nothing is existing in its own little bubble. We can't focus and compartmentalize, but that's more of a mental gestation. That's not the way of reality. That's not the way of nature. It's not the way of our human bodies. So, you know, I'll continue to speak as a systems thinker in that way, because we want emissions to go down. Well, if we have a bunch of constructions and trucks coming in, or food truck deliveries and all of that, or the industries making the electricity or electric cars, et cetera, you know, how are we connected to the rest of the world and our lifestyle and usage? How can we just create a healthier community overall, which starts with the consciousness shift of what do we need to really sustain ourselves? Like what can we cut back on, or what can we shift that wouldn't necessarily affect our quality of life, but might affect the way we are consumers and what we use. So I just want to bring all that to the table, and I'll continue to. And I love you guys.
Thank you, Ray.
Oh, man.
Brian, Brian wanted to say something. Brian, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just going to say, Jack and Ray, your points about the committee, you know, potentially being disbanded, you know, those are good points. But I think if we all work together, and we've talked about this, and Steve has some experience with Civic Spark. There's a program where essentially a paid intern in the climate, you know, realm that works on these types of projects would be funded for up to, I think it's a full year. It's like almost 2,000 hours of free time. And if we could prepare a short little grant application and get somebody in the city, that person, we'd have another year of somebody potentially writing grants, working with the community, helping with that transparency that you were talking about, Ray, and working within the city to kind of pull that all together. So, I mean, even if we exit, there's potential for another entrance there.
Could we get that grant application written before we expire, if we expire?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty short, honestly, it's a pretty short thing. And I have been extremely busy with work the past couple of weeks. Just like unbelievable, like just, you know, I haven't had time to really put my head to it, but Steve has experience working with someone in Seafrog that turned out to be a really great person and moved on to do good things. So I think it's something we should look at.
I think so too. That sounds great.
Thanks,
And
Brian.
I'm aligned with Phil. I think at least I will be involved in the movement, whatever the form. Phil?
Yeah, let me reiterate that I'm going to still be interested whether we exist as official city committee or not.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about this incremental idea and push back a little bit, because just like the COVID emergency is an emergency that got dealt with very quickly, but it's still, the solution is still an incremental one, in that we're still looking for arms that haven't received vaccinations. So the solution of getting everybody vaccinated continues incrementally. And the same thing is true with climate. And I'll take it back to my wife, Suzanne, and my house, where we've made the commitment to zero out our carbon emissions, or at least our direct ones, meaning our building, our house, and our vehicles. But actually achieving it, getting to it, is an incremental process. And we had an electrician in our house a week and a half ago. We waited a year to do that because of COVID. We didn't want to have a potentially infected workman in our house. But having been vaccinated, we felt comfortable and got him in to run the electrical circuits for the induction cooktop and the electric clothes dryer. So we are making incremental progress towards zeroing out our carbon footprints. And I think we have to remember that each of us, and I doubt that any of us on this call has actually zeroed out their emissions. If you have, I apologize. The other thing I want to mention is the REACH code. I think one of the most important things our committee has done and brought to the city council and the city council adopted is the REACH code that requires that new buildings in Ojai be constructed all electric. This was very important. Symbolic is maybe the wrong word, but it is symbolic in that other cities can see what Ojai has done. I know that the REACH code is coming back to the council for a review. And I think, as we've discussed in some of our working sessions, that it's important for us to reiterate our positions that that we shouldn't have exemptions or exceptions to all electric construction, or if there are some, that they're really minimized. For example, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, tiny houses, whatever kind of residential construction, there's absolutely no reason why the city shouldn't be requiring all new residential construction to be all electric. So that's one more thing that we need to do while we still exist as a committee. And we need to talk about the other exceptions / exemptions, whatever we call them.
That perhaps could be the topic in our May meeting, community meeting like this, talking about the REACH code that I think is coming back to council sometime late May. Thank you, Phil. Jack or Bill, you had your hand up before.
I'll let Jack go.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'll just be quick, I think. I would be appreciative if it's appropriate for the Climate Emergency Committee for y'all to discuss amongst yourselves, or even maybe at a next meeting, what the best way forward is. Maybe the best way forward is that we form a coalition together. Maybe we have more liberty. Maybe there's less red tape and we can work together just on our own individually and have some sort of feedback process with council. So, while I felt distressed before, it occurred to me, well, maybe there's a better way for us to all be more effective. And so I would appreciate it if you could discuss amongst yourselves at some point, like just have a little meeting about, like, is it beneficial to move forward as the existing Climate Emergency Committee, or is it better to disband and form a just a private group like I mentioned?
Thanks, Jack. And then Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of build on a little bit of what Ray and Phil just said. While we have to keep the global impacts in mind, we don't want to lose sight of our responsibility for exercising leverage where we have influence. Sometimes you can say, oh, well, let's only focus on the global impacts. Absolutely correct, and absolutely important to keep that in mind. But I'm going to give you a little example. Right now, on the next council meeting, we're going to continue to have that continued discussion and controversy on the ATP project, whether we're going to continue to re-engineer and reiterate and continue to re-engineer our commitment to, and continue to re-engineer our hardscape for bike-friendly travel, which has tremendous impacts in terms of emissions. We continue to have pushback from certain elements of the community. I call them the four-laners, that don't want to have the kind of redesign of our streets, because frankly, the what I call Maricopa Avenue is just the beginning. If we can accomplish this and continue forward, we have a master plan. We have work to do with the county, and those have real impacts in terms of greenhouse emissions. But it's not quote unquote global impact in a broad sense, but it certainly has an impact here in our community. We also recently, reiterated the importance of the county respecting LAFCO guidelines in terms of land use regulations inside the sphere of influence, which is approximately double the size of the city jurisdiction. And the county has more or less done a mea culpa and said, you're right. Thank you for reminding us. When the city adopts land use matters, whether it has, on all kinds of issues, including greenhouse emissions impacts, we have to respect and be consistent with those land use regulations in the sphere of influence, which is much larger than the city of Ojai, city limits. So again, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the mechanics matter, even though it may, it's not an either or, is what I'm really trying to say. Keep the old phrase, right? Think globally, act locally. It's extremely important that we keep that in mind here, in my opinion.
Bill, is there anything that would be helpful kind of from the committee's end for that ATP meeting coming up? I mean, besides kind of vocalizing our support.
Well, I think vocalizing the support is important, but I'll give you another example. We need to move forward on deploying more chargers for bicycle travel in the Ojai Valley as a whole. We had a VCTC meeting where they were talking about grants awarded for bike lanes in East County. And two of us on the commission said, why aren't you putting chargers on these long bike lanes so you encourage bicycle travel for commuters to get off of the highways with their electric bikes and everything. The revolution that's coming in personal mobility. We had a staff person that didn't understand the update in California state law that said that class 1 and class 2 bikes have to be allowed on bike lanes. And so why would we want chargers? They made the statement, oh, well, we're prohibiting electric bikes on our bike lanes, even though there's a state law that says you have to allow class 1 and class 2. And so, we got that kind of clarified, but it seems so simple. It's just a little simple detail, but it's so important if you're trying to think about redeploying or rethinking how people get around in a way that minimizes greenhouse emissions. And we have county level staff people that still aren't up to speed with this. So I don't mean to get too much or picayune about it, but I think the mechanics matter.
Thanks, Bill. Anything else? I want to give a shout out to I believe my neighbor.
Ray's got his hand up.
Okay, Stu and Angelica, I don't know if that's you on the line. Do you have anything that you want to contribute or ask or say? They're literally, I think, my next door neighbors right there.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Stu. I wasn't sure if you're in.
Along, kind of getting a feel for all the issues and action and things like that. So I appreciate you letting me be a fly on the wall and see how it all works and what's going on and how the issues come together. So anyway, yeah, I know it's kind of funny. We're about 20 feet apart, I think.
I know, that's what I was saying. What the heck? So anyway, well, thanks for joining us. Nice to have you.
My pleasure. Good to see you in action.
Okay. And then Ray, you had your hand up, and then we'll wrap up soon. So Ray?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on the heels of something Jack said, because Jack used the term coalition. And, I just want to put forward that, as vice president of the Ojai Valley Green Coalition, for a dozen years, we've had our role. It's reformed in the last year. We purposely didn't ask for any city budget to, because we know the stress the pandemic has had on the city. And, Michelle was on the board of the Green Coalition for a long time. And now we have a new board. In fact, it's because of her that myself and others were brought in. But, we've been focusing on a lot of these issues, on emissions, on bike and ride and roll and the bike lanes, and have lent our support to that, and the Restoration Resilient Council, and pretty much everything that's talked about. The Green Coalition has had, in some way, shape, or form, their fingers in it. Sometimes it's just sending emails out, But certainly one of the things we're focusing on is how can we function as a coalition to get the community and organizations speaking to each other. And I'm hoping the city can rely on us a little bit more for that, because that's one of the roles we fulfill. And certainly with this issue as well, with the emissions, we're not having Earth Day this year, but, you know, just even in the past, you know, the Green Coalition for, you know, 10 years had, you know, had a lot of had exhibits about solar and electric cars, and, you know, on Earth Day, and then throughout the year promoting that and educating. So we are an educational resource and a community outreach resource. So I just want to really emphasize that, because the Green Coalition sometimes recedes into the background and no one knows that we're here. And I'm fairly new with it. Bill knows that, you know, we came out of Trim Tab, and the new board came out of a deep dive into what's wanted and needed in the Valley, and asking community input on that as well.
Jim, you wanted to say something? Oh, you're muted.
I have to run. I apologize, everybody. Thank you so much for the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Jim. All right. Any other final comments? Anyone else? Okay, I guess the one thing I was gonna just remind the remaining people on the call, which we're all probably aware, the city is in the process of developing a budget for this next year, and the priority and goal setting conversation. So that'll be coming up on the next council meeting. So just to kind of tune into that and be thinking about how we can prioritize reducing emissions among the city's goals and priorities, and as well as where there's opportunity in the budget to reflect that. So that's the one comment I was going to make about that, just participating in that process of goal setting and the budget. Anything else? Any other final comments? Tomorrow's Earth Day. I don't know. Does anyone know? I read something about, is there a tree planting? Bill, do you know, is that going on in the city? I don't know.
Ray mentioned that tomorrow at 11, right?
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. That. Okay.
Yeah, 11 o'clock. The city is speaking of it as an Arbor Day,
Okay.
Even though that's usually March 7th, because of the pandemic, Arbor Day didn't happen. And since the city was awarded the Tree City USA again, a tree is being planted in Libby Park by the playground on the grass. And then the Land Conservancy, the Green Coalition, and the Chamber of Commerce are going to have tables by the fountain area as well.
Just all coming together for more impact.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you all for joining on this call today. And we don't have the date set for the May meeting, but that will be, we'll communicate that with city staff, and then they'll post that when we have a date finalized, but it'll be on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock again. So stay tuned for that. Have a good rest of the day.